Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into the shocking story of Rick Harrison, the star. From being adored to coming clean about his heinous deeds in court, let's examine his transition from television celebrity to real life when Rick Harrison, the Pawn Star, confessed to his murderous criminal actions in court. He changed from being a devoted family man to an infamous criminal. The public's opinion of him. If this fact shocks you, remember to hit like and subscribe, so you may be informed of the next shocking stories. Leave a comment below with your opinions on Rick Harrison and these shocking discoveries. When agents concentrated on the store's basement, the investigation saw significant breakthroughs. The hub of human trafficking operations was a basement that had long been closed to the public. Children were trafficked through a secret location where their identities and lives were wiped. The criminal network, with temporary cells and flickering black lights alongside the actual pawn business above, the basement was a nightmare realm. The FBI's discovery of the basement prison signaled the start of a thorough and extensive inquiry. The team conducting the investigation promptly secured the area and rescued the children who were confined, but after thoroughly searching the basement, they discovered much more than predictions. They found a treasure bonanza together with obvious evidence of human trafficking. Of important documents, such as bank records and communication information, more resources that might reveal the entire extent of the criminal organization that is responsible for it. The records showed that officials and businesses were directly involved. Owners in this trafficking scheme. The more thoroughly the FBI looked into, they came to see that this was a sophisticated, international criminal organization rather than a small-scale crime. Close relationships. The FBI had to work together as the probe swiftly grew. Work with law enforcement organizations throughout the global scope of the trafficking network was not limited to the United States, and the FBI collaborated closely with organizations in Southeast Asia, Mexico, and Central America to find the criminals. What the investigators discovered was quite startling. This was a group that has been in business for years of selling children to the highest bidders and smuggling them across borders. The network engaged in other illicit operations, such as selling, in addition to people trafficking, stolen firearms, medications, and antiquities. As the FBI's squad grew, concentrated primarily on the operation's financial aspect, tracking the money's movement through a number of front businesses, bank accounts, and overseas organizations. The money raised from it was quite challenging because the sale of antiquities and trafficked children were routed via intricate financial systems. FBI forensic accountants, in order to track down the masterminds behind the operation, diligently pursued the money trail connecting Harrison's pawn shop to the larger trafficking network. The impact of social media and online platforms on human behavior was among the most startling discoveries. Trafficking scheme. The network had established a dark web where customers could exchange minors, frequently dressed as lawful transactions. Because these websites were part of the dark web, they were hard to track down, allowing the group to operate virtually unnoticed. The FBI collaborated with specialists in cybercrime to overthrow this regime, but it was a very challenging undertaking. The criminals had employed a variety of concealment strategies, including cutting-edge encryption to safeguard their communications and transactions. As time went on, the FBI started detaining important participants in the people trafficking network. Despite the importance of these arrests, it was evident that the organization was still far from being destroyed. The network was still being handled covertly by masterminds who were still at large. The hunt for these leaders remains continuing, but the first round of arrests made a clear statement about this human trafficking organization is not unbeatable, and justice will be served in the end. Music. Working with the victims was one of the most difficult parts of the inquiry. The kids were saved from these kids had suffered from psychological anguish and unspeakable horrors in the basement of Harrison's pawn business. Was significant. The FBI collaborated extensively with psychologists from social service organizations and other experts to guarantee they got the assistance and care they required. This was a protracted and challenging process because a large number of the kids were so traumatized that they were unable to trust anyone. Even the people who had saved. Together with anti-human trafficking groups, the FBI initiated the process of reintegration and psychological healing for the kids, assisting them in starting afresh an examination of Rick Harrison's pawn shop and the international trafficking organization that runs underneath it. Is one of the most intricate and well-known cases the FBI has ever dealt with, included an international criminal network affiliated with organized crime, crooked authorities and influential people, but the FBI's probe is far from over. Keeps growing, with more arrests anticipated soon. What the FBI has discovered is a terrifying reminder of the unseen threats that criminal networks pose in our society, acting in the open, looking for ways to take advantage of the weaknesses and suffering of. Additionally, both children are victims of this trafficking network. The FBI's efforts provide a ray of hope for those who have been saved and the families who have been devastated by the death of loved ones. Dark, but there is still a long way to go before justice is served, and the entire scope of these crimes has not yet been exposed. Don't forget to check back for more shocking and untold revelations. To click, like, and subscribe. Let's now talk about what to ensure you don't miss any great forthcoming events. You might consider turning on notifications. Videos. Rick Harrison's pawn shop inquiry is simply the first step, revealing the beginning of a worldwide issue that has been subtly escalating for years. In the background, the FBI's attempts to bring justice to. Although the victims are aware that their work is far from over, one thing is certain: authorities intend to eliminate the criminal group that exploited Rick Harrison's pawn shop as a cover. This network component. By article following the FBI's discovery of an underground jail in the public was surprised and in disbelief when they discovered the basement of Rick Harrison's pawn business. A man who had previously appeared on the popular reality TV series Pawn Stars may have been participating in such a sinister and horrifying conduct on the History Channel for more than 10 years. TV watchers who earlier believed that Rick Harrison was a sincere, diligent businessman who began his career with charisma and commitment suddenly had to confront the harsh reality that the man they looked up to was charged with involvement in one of the most horrible acts unimaginable. The ramifications of this revelation were extremely dramatic and appeared almost instantly for those who liked Rick Harrison's modest, real persona and had once liked Pawn Stars. It seemed as though the world had been completely upended, and more than 300 children had been. Some of them were smuggled from Southeast Asia and Central America and were kept captive in the basement of his pawn shop. Nearly incomprehensible. How could someone who formerly seemed so sincere and reliable on the involvement of television in such heinous crimes? Harrison's audience's trust in him was quickly destroyed in the hours and days that followed. The media rushed to cover the story, each adding additional startling facts as a result of the exposure. Diligently reported on the case, looking into Harrison's previous financial dealings and his ties to a global criminal organization. For the first time in many years, Harrison had changed from the amiable, trustworthy character on film to a suspicious one. Ruined for all time by the terrible charges against, the entire country responded enthusiastically to him, not just the media was stunned, and people from all walks of life found it difficult to make sense of the enormous distinction between Harrison's Pawn Stars persona and the man currently charged with being at the core of a worldwide human trafficking ring. Longtime viewers were devastated and extremely dissatisfied, unable to understand how could someone they had seen on screen hundreds of times be involved in such a heinous act. Reactions on social media ranged from shock and indignation to sentiments of treachery. #NotMePawnStar got popular for a few days as people expressed their surprise. The incident served as a bitter reminder that those we formerly trusted can be dishonest. Those we adore might not be who we believe them to be. Many people said they felt deceived. Harrison had deceived people about music. Years. For long-standing viewers of the show, this was particularly difficult to swallow. People like Chumley, Rick Harrison, and Corey Harrison were well known. Their Las Vegas pawn store was practically a cultural icon. The idea that a location that was formerly recognized for purchasing and selling precious goods might concurrently serve as the focal point of one of it was nearly hard to unearth. The most horrifying human trafficking schemes yet discovered. Procedure. As the inquiry progressed, new information kept coming to light, enhancing a growing public sense of betrayal. Law enforcement sources claimed that Harrison was charged with engaged in human trafficking for many years, actively helping to transfer children through his store. Although there was no concrete proof that he was involved in kidnappings, there was evidence that he was heavily involved in doing the crimes and using his company to launder money. The reality that Harrison had carried on operating a respectable and prosperous pawn shop while covertly participating in such a horrific fact was made much more startling by the horrible storyline. The public's response was not simply one of hatred and indignation, but also one of terror. How could this occur covertly? How could someone who was formerly seen as trustworthy and grounded on TV had kept such a sinister secret for so long that those inquiries kept coming back to many as they attempted to comprehend the horrifying truth, and they later understood that this wasn't only about the one person's acts were a part of a much bigger problem. Human trafficking, an evil issue that lurks in the background and is frequently overlooked by society. Public pressure on the authorities increased in the weeks after the story was made public. Many demanded prompt and immediate action. There were voices calling for more stringent laws governing pawn shops as individuals. Following the affair, lawmakers started to wonder if the sector was turning into a safe haven for illegal conduct. Started to focus more on this industry and suggest ways to enforce more stringent regulations on companies that trade in substantial sums of money and precious items. Some even proposed requiring pawn shops to submit all transactions to the police in order to stop them from serving as a cover for illicit activity. In the meantime, Rick Harrison's legal team put in a lot of effort to manage the situation. He was charged with several major offenses, such as involvement in the sale, human trafficking, and money laundering of stolen antiques. The seriousness of the accusations could lead to him serving decades in prison if found guilty. The court case moved slowly as detectives gathered evidence and construct a case against him. Harrison was under increasing strain as each new discovery added to the burden of the charges looming over. The most pressing question in the public's mind was whether did Harrison have the opportunity to start over after redeeming himself, or was his image that was severely damaged by the horrifying acts that were concealed in his pawn shop's basement. In the early it appeared nearly difficult for Harrison to get past this scandal in the days following the case's release. His reputation was permanently harmed and the public's confidence was all but destroyed, but as the inquiry proceeded, some started to question if Harrison had actually participated in the human trafficking scheme or if he had only served as a pawn in a far more extensive criminal conspiracy. Even though there was evidence that he helped transport minors who were trafficked, numerous unanswered questions. Did Harrison fully comprehend the scope of the trafficking ring? Or had he inadvertently become entangled in a scheme that he didn't completely understand? A businessman who is used as a front for the criminal network or a willing accomplice. One thing became evident as the court proceedings progressed: this case was far from above. When the underground jail beneath Harrison's pawn shop was discovered, it signaled the start of a string of incidents that would rock the world for years to come. Although the public's intense and persistent response was reasonable, in the end the Harrisons' potential punishment for the alleged offenses would be determined by the law. As for the victims of their road to recovery had only just begun, but many had been victims of human trafficking. Rescued and were getting assistance and care as the inquiry continued. The fight to demolish the complete criminal network and hold everyone accountable would go on, and was the world observing. The world waits for answers, and while the inquiry goes on, it's becoming more and more obvious that this case involves more than just the crimes of a person but speaks to a greater problem: human trafficking and the worldwide strive to put an end to this heinous crime. The tale of Rick Harrison, a once loved now that a television personality has taken a dark turn. The most sorrowful part is the irreparable damage done to hundreds of people's lives, not just the ruin of his name. Despite their anguish, the stories of these innocent youngsters are now being music heard. Public indignation is lawful. The goal of the proceedings and continuing inquiry is to make sure that these kids won't be forgotten and hope justice would be served in the end. As the shock of learning about as things start to calm down in the hidden basement under Rick Harrison's pawn business, attention turns to what will happen next is the court case that will decide his fate. Despite the fact that the public is still in shock at the horrifying information that the FBI investigation revealed, the law enforcement and the media have focused entirely on the trial. In addition to deciding Rick Harrison's personal future, the case against him may establish a precedent. For the way law enforcement responds to crimes involving organized crime, money laundering, and human trafficking in the upcoming Harrison's legal team has been working non-stop in the weeks since the truth was made public in an effort to create a defense plan that would stand up to the overwhelming volume of evidence gathered by the Harrison has been charged with major offenses by the FBI since his capture. He is charged with participating in a global human trafficking organization that involved the removal of children from one area to another for exploitation and sale. The allegations are not just human. Harrison is also charged with conspiracy to launder money and involvement in the sale of stolen goods. Antiquities. These are serious accusations. If found guilty, he may spend decades behind bars, forfeit his entire fortune, and be charged with a permanent blemish on his record. His team's chosen legal approach blends denial with an effort to lessen his accountability. They strongly claim Harrison was unaware of the extent of the human trafficking ring operating beneath his pawn business. His defense attorneys claim that Harrison was only a pawn and was unaware of the underground prison. Unintentionally utilized in a significantly more serious criminal conspiracy. The defense's main contention is that Harrison's participation in the trafficking. They contend that his organization was entirely coincidental and that he was just conducting business as usual. Unaware that his store had turned into a center for illegal activity. To bolster this claim, Harrison's attorneys stress that there isn't any concrete proof that he was involved in the most heinous trafficking activities. They claim that the financial activities the FBI has uncovered are simply a typical aspect of a pawn shop's activities, and that the selling of stolen goods might occur without his consent, approval, or knowledge, but the prosecution is not persuaded by these claims. They make a compelling argument that Harrison intentionally enabled the trafficking and sale of minors. By the prosecution identifies a number of financial and communication issues with his pawn shop. Documents obtained by the FBI, such as money Harrison received from people who were intimately connected to the trafficking network. The sale of stolen antiques and other illicit operations were linked to these transactions, with the prosecution claiming that Harrison laundered money for illegal purposes through his pawn shop. The proof against organizations. In addition to the financial documents, Harrison is damning. The FBI also found a lot of digital evidence, including emails and phone call logs. Video security footage demonstrating Harrison's direct interaction with organized crime members and had helped finance the human trafficking network by assisting in the trafficking of antiques. The prosecution also provided statements and testimonies from a number of victims who were freed from the underground prison. From former trafficking network participants, these witnesses attest that Harrison was completely cognizant of what was occurring and even actively assisted in guiding kids through his store. Harrison maintains his innocence in spite of the mounting evidence that has forced him into a corner. Insists that he is just another victim in the trafficking scheme and was unaware of its full scope. A convoluted criminal conspiracy. His attorneys contend that Harrison is a well-known businessman who used legal methods to establish his empire and who was duped by others around him. Additionally, they assert that by accusing him of such grave offenses, the government has misused its authority and that there is not enough proof to back up the money laundering and trafficking charges. As the trial draws near, the case is causing a media frenzy. Escalates. Public opinion on the matter is split. Some think Harrison is just a pawn in a larger scheme and a victim of circumstances. greater plan of which he was unaware. Others are incensed at the notion that how someone who has been in the spotlight for so long could have been implicated in such horrible atrocities is now a occurrence where reporters set up camp outside the courthouse to await the most recent information. The trial's effects go beyond Harrison's private life with wider ramifications for the entire pawn shop sector. The controversy has revealed significant shortcomings in the legislation governing pawn shops, prompting demands for more stringent regulation of the sector. Lawmakers have advocated for stricter regulations to stop companies like Harrison's pawn shop from serving as fronts for illegal activity.